On a calm Saturday afternoon, Colonel Olivia Carter walked into a small grocery store on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. Dressed in a simple grey t-shirt, blue jeans and sneakers, she looked like any other customer, blending effortlessly into the crowd. To most people, she was just another ordinary woman, casually picking out essentials after a long, exhausting week. But what no one could have guessed was that this woman had dedicated her entire life to defending her country, leading troops on battlefields thousands of miles away. For Olivia, moments like these, walking through a grocery store, selecting fresh produce, reading labels on canned goods, were a rare privilege, a chance to enjoy a slice of normal life. But normal was about to change. As Olivia reached for a box of cereal, a sudden loud clatter echoed from the end of the aisle. She turned her head and saw a tall, broad-shouldered man in a police uniform, Officer Travis Mitchell. He had just knocked over a carton of eggs and a bottle of juice, spilling them across the clean white tiles. For a moment, Olivia expected him to bend down and clean up the mess. But instead, Travis glanced at the spill, shrugged, and casually walked away, leaving the broken eggshells and spreading juice behind. Olivia narrowed her eyes. Years of military service had trained her to notice small details, to recognize responsibility, and to hold people accountable. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Excuse me, officer. You dropped something. You should probably clean that up." Travis paused mid-step. Slowly, he turned his head, his cold blue eyes locking onto Olivia's. A smirk curled at the edge of his mouth, a smirk that dripped with arrogance and condescension. "And who do you think you are to tell me what to do?" he scoffed. His tone was filled with disdain, as if the mere idea of being corrected was beneath him. Olivia remained unmoved. "I don't think it's about who I am. It's about doing the right thing. You wear a uniform. You represent the law. People look up to you. Shouldn't you be setting an example?" Travis let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Lady, I don't have time for your lectures. If you're so concerned, why don't you clean it up yourself?" His mocking tone sent a wave of murmurs through the nearby shoppers, who had now started to take notice of the confrontation. Olivia took a slow, steady breath. She had faced enemies on the battlefield, but right now she was standing before a different kind of enemy, one who misused power and hid behind his authority. She could feel the eyes of the customers watching, waiting to see what she would do next. And in that moment, Olivia knew this wasn't just about a spilled carton of eggs. This was about accountability, respect, justice. She wasn't going to back down. A tense silence hung in the air as Olivia stood her ground, her unwavering gaze fixed on Officer Travis Mitchell. The grocery store, once filled with the quiet hum of casual shoppers, had now become a stage for an unexpected confrontation. Travis smirked, crossing his arms over his broad chest. His police badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a reminder of the power he believed he held. "Listen, lady," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I don't answer to you. I don't have to do anything you say." But Olivia didn't flinch. Her years in the military had taught her to read people, and she could see through his arrogance. He wasn't just dismissing her, he was challenging her. She kept her voice calm but firm. "It's not about answering to me. It's about taking responsibility for your actions. That's what a real officer does." A few bystanders murmured in agreement, shifting closer to watch. A woman in her 30s pulled out her phone, quietly recording the exchange. Travis noticed the camera, and for a brief second something flickered in his eyes, a hint of irritation. Then, just as quickly, he hardened his expression, taking a slow step toward Olivia. "You think you're some kind of authority on how to do my job?" he asked, his tone sharpening. Because I can tell you right now, you're not. Olivia didn't back down. Actually, officer, I've spent my entire career leading soldiers, people who understand duty and discipline, people who take accountability seriously. Maybe that's why your behavior is standing out so much right now. The onlookers' whispers grew louder. A man near the produce section shook his head, muttering, "She's got a point." Travis's jaw tightened. For the first time, Olivia could see it, the crack in his confidence. But instead of backing off, he doubled down. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reached for his holstered gun. The moment his fingers touched the handle, a hush fell over the store. Olivia's stomach tensed. She had seen this before. A power-hungry man feeling control slipped through his fingers. He didn't draw the weapon, not yet, but his hand remained resting on it, his fingers drumming against the grip. A silent threat. The woman recording the video gasped audibly, her phone trembling in her hands. Another man took a step back, pulling his young daughter behind him. Travis leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "You're starting to irritate me." Olivia stayed completely still, her military instincts kicking in. She wasn't afraid. She had faced worse threats than this. But she also knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about a spill on the floor anymore. This was about control. Travis was trying to intimidate her, trying to assert dominance. She could see it in his eyes, the way they flickered between her face and the people watching. He was testing her, and Olivia Carter was not someone you tested. She took a measured step closer, standing tall, her voice steady as steel. "Move your hand off that gun, officer." A beat of silence. Travis's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected her to call him out. The tension in the store was suffocating now, every person holding their breath. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. The air inside the grocery store felt heavy, thick with tension, as every eye fixated on the confrontation unfolding between Colonel Olivia Carter and Officer Travis Mitchell. The officer's hand still rested on his gun, his fingers casually tapping the grip, as if he wanted everyone to remember the authority he held. But Olivia didn't waver. Her stance was strong, her eyes locked onto his with an unshakable intensity. "I said, move your hand off that gun," she repeated, her voice calm but commanding. For a brief second, Travis hesitated. His smirk had faded, replaced by something else, uncertainty. He was not used to being challenged, and certainly not by a woman, and not in front of a crowd. A few more people had started recording the scene, their cameras tilted upward, capturing his every move. But instead of backing off, Travis made the wrong choice. With a slow, deliberate movement, he curled his fingers tighter around the handle of his gun, not drawing it, but making sure Olivia saw exactly what he was doing. A silent message, a final warning. His voice was low, edged with an ugly sort of confidence. "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with." Olivia took a calculated step forward, keeping her hands at her sides, controlled, non-threatening. But her presence alone was a force of power. "No, officer," she said, her tone like sharpened steel. "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with." Her words hung in the air, and the entire store seemed to hold its breath. Travis's jaw twitched. The tension was unbearable, coiled like a spring, ready to snap. A child whispered, "Mom, is he going to shoot her?" The mother hushed him, pulling him closer. And then a sound, a distinct, sharp click. Travis's thumb had flipped the gun's safety off. A woman in the back gasped. Someone moved quickly out of the way. This was no longer a warning. This was a threat. The weight of the moment pressed down on Olivia, but her heartbeat remained steady. She had been in far worse situations. She had stared down enemies with real weapons, under real threats, in war zones where survival was never guaranteed. And this man, this officer hiding behind his badge, was nothing compared to them. But the difference between them and Travis Mitchell? They knew who they were fighting. Travis was fighting the wrong person. Olivia didn't move. She didn't flinch. Instead, she spoke with deliberate clarity. "If you draw that weapon, I promise you, it will be the worst mistake of your life." Travis's expression flickered again, because now she wasn't just daring him, she was predicting his downfall, and for the first time he felt it. The weight of his actions, the gravity of his mistake. The phone cameras were still rolling, the store had gone silent, and deep down he knew. He had already lost. A cold silence settled over the store. The tension was unbearable, thick like a storm about to break. Officer Travis Mitchell stood frozen, his hand still gripping his holstered gun, the safety off. Across from him, Colonel Olivia Carter remained unmoved, her face unreadable, her posture calm yet commanding. The customers stood paralyzed, their phones still recording, their eyes locked onto the two figures in the aisle. Everyone knew what was happening. This was no longer about a spilled carton of eggs. This was about power, and Travis Mitchell was losing control. His breathing had changed, shorter, quicker, uneven. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. He could feel the pressure closing in on him, the cameras, the crowd, and the unwavering presence of Olivia Carter. She hadn't moved an inch, hadn't flinched, hadn't looked away. Instead, she had given him a warning. "If you draw that weapon, I promise you it will be the worst mistake of your life." Her voice still echoed in his ears, and deep down he knew she was right. His fingers twitched on the handle of the gun, hesitation gripping his muscles like a vice. He wanted to assert his dominance, wanted to prove he was in control, but the longer he stood there, the more the moments slipped through his fingers. The longer he delayed, the more the weight of his actions pressed down on him. Then, a voice. Not Olivia's, someone from the crowd. "That's enough." The words cut through the silence like a blade. From the entrance of the store, another figure appeared. A store security officer, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a radio clipped to his belt. He stepped forward with measured authority, his hand hovering near his own sidearm, but not on it. He wasn't there to threaten. He was there to de-escalate. "Officer," the man said again, his voice steady, "you need to remove your hand from your weapon, now." Travis's jaw clenched, his body stiffened. His gaze snapped to Olivia again, looking for some kind of weakness, some sign of intimidation, but there was none. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't wavered. And in that moment, Travis realized something. He was the only one standing in the wrong, the only one who looked like a threat, the only one out of control, and everyone knew it. A lump formed in his throat as the pressure became unbearable. His fingers, once locked tightly around the handle of his gun, began to loosen. And then he let go. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he lifted his hand away from the weapon and took a step back. The crowd exhaled. A woman near the back of the store whispered in relief. The store security officer didn't take his eyes off Travis. "That was almost a very bad decision," he said plainly. "Step away from the colonel, now." Travis's jaw ticked. His face burned with humiliation, but he knew he had no choice. His dominance had crumbled, his authority was slipping away, and Colonel Olivia Carter was still standing strong. This wasn't over, but it was the beginning of the end. The atmosphere inside the grocery store had shifted. Officer Travis Mitchell, once standing with arrogant confidence, now looked like a man cornered. The moment he had removed his hand from his gun, the balance of power had shifted completely. The store security officer remained firm, his eyes locked on Travis. "Step away from Colonel Carter," he repeated, his voice carrying a quiet authority. Travis clenched his fists, his entire body stiff with frustration. He had lost. And now everyone knew it. The crowd of shoppers, once hesitant, now stood with their phones still recording, their eyes filled with judgment and disbelief. This was no longer just an argument. This was evidence, and it was all being captured on camera. Olivia Carter stood unshaken, her posture as steady as a mountain. She hadn't needed to raise her voice, hadn't needed to move an inch. All she had done was stand her ground. And Travis crumbled under the weight of his own actions. But then he made another mistake. Instead of backing off, he scoffed, rolling his shoulders as if trying to shake off his embarrassment. His lips twisted into a sneer. "You think this means something?" he spat, his eyes darting to the people filming. "You think a bunch of idiots with cell phones can tell me how to do my job?" A few gasps rippled through the onlookers. Olivia tilted her head slightly. Even now, even when he had clearly lost, he refused to accept accountability. He was trying to save face, trying to rebuild his dominance by belittling the people around him. But it was too late for that. The evidence was already there. And Travis Mitchell had already sealed his fate. At that moment, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Actually, Officer Mitchell, those idiots with cell phones just recorded your misconduct in full." The voice came from the front of the store. Heads turned. And there, walking in with calculated steps, was Captain Daniel Reyes, a high-ranking official from the local police department. The moment Travis saw him, his face went pale. Reyes's uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming. But it was his expression that sent a wave of panic through Travis. It was the expression of a man who had seen enough, a man who already knew what had happened here. Reyes walked forward, stopping just a few feet from Travis. He took a slow look around, the shattered eggs, the silent but expectant crowd, the phones recording every second. Then he met Olivia's gaze. "Colonel Carter, are you all right?" She gave a small nod. "I'm fine, but this situation is unacceptable." Reyes exhaled sharply, his eyes flicking back to Travis. "That's putting it lightly." Travis swallowed hard, a thin layer of sweat forming on his forehead. He tried to speak, but Reyes cut him off. "Don't!" The word was quiet, but it carried more force than a shouted order. "I don't want to hear excuses. I don't want to hear explanations. I've already been sent multiple video recordings. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Travis opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because what could he say? There was no way out of this. The entire store was silent, waiting to see what would happen next. And then Reyes delivered the final blow. "Hand over your badge and gun now." Travis's eyes widened in shock. What? Reyes's voice remained calm, but there was no room for argument. "You are being placed on immediate suspension pending further investigation. I suggest you comply." For a split second, Travis didn't move. His mind was racing, desperately looking for a way to turn this around. But there was no way out. Not this time. His arrogance had led him too far. With slow, jerky movements, he reached for his belt, unhooking his gun and setting it on a nearby counter. Then he removed his badge, staring at it for a long moment. When he finally placed it down, his hands were shaking. This was it. This was the moment he lost everything. As Reyes signaled for two officers to escort Travis out of the store, Olivia finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but filled with meaning. "Actions have consequences, Officer Mitchell. You just learned that the hard way." Travis's face burned with humiliation, but he said nothing. Because he knew. She was right. And as the officers led him toward the exit, The crowd that had once been silent now erupted into applause. Justice had been served, but this was only the beginning, because soon the entire world would see what had happened here. As Officer Travis Mitchell was escorted out of the store, the applause from the crowd echoed through the aisles. Some people cheered, others breathed sighs of relief, and many simply stood in shock, processing what had just happened. But for Colonel Olivia Carter, this wasn't about celebration. This was about accountability. She stood tall, watching as Travis disappeared through the exit, his once unshakable confidence shattered. Captain Daniel Reyes, now standing beside her, turned and addressed the crowd. "I want to assure everyone here that this incident will be handled with full transparency. If any of you have recorded footage, please submit it to our department." People immediately nodded, a few stepping forward to show their phones still recording. One woman, the same one who had been filming since the beginning, walked up to Olivia. Her eyes were filled with gratitude. "You stood up to him when no one else could?" "Thank you," Olivia offered a small but firm nod. "No one should have to fear the people who are meant to protect them." The woman swallowed hard, as if holding back emotions. "I've seen officers like him before, but they always get away with it. Not this time." Not this time. Within hours, the footage had been uploaded to social media, and it spread like wildfire. Millions of views, thousands of comments. Every major news outlet picked up the story. Officer abuses power against senior army officer, instantly regrets it. Colonel Olivia Carter stands up to corrupt cop and wins. Police officer faces suspension after threatening unarmed woman in public. The public outrage was immediate. People demanded justice. They demanded answers, and soon they got them. The police department issued a formal statement confirming that Travis Mitchell was placed on indefinite suspension pending an internal investigation. But the real damage was already done. People who had been mistreated by Travis in the past started coming forward. Stories of intimidation, harassment, unchecked power. It turned out this wasn't his first offense. It was just the first time he had been caught in front of the entire world, and the department had no choice but to take permanent action. Just 1 week later, a follow-up announcement was made. Travis Mitchell was fired from the force, his badge revoked, his gun permanently confiscated, and worse, he was under investigation for abuse of power, his reputation destroyed. The man who once believed he was untouchable was now the face of everything wrong with law enforcement. No department would hire him, no community would trust him. And the people he had once looked down on? Now they stood taller than him. In his small, empty apartment, Travis sat alone, staring at the news playing on his TV, his own face plastered across the screen, his own downfall. And for the first time, he understood the weight of his mistakes. But it was too late. Meanwhile, Colonel Olivia Carter had moved on, not for glory, not for recognition, but because the fight for justice never stops. The incident had made her a national figure. People wanted to hear her voice. They wanted her to speak out, to lead. She was invited to law enforcement panels discussing accountability and ethical responsibility. She spoke at community events reminding people that justice is not just a privilege, it's a right. And most importantly, she inspired others to stand up, because if one person can make a difference, imagine what happens when we all do. One day, Olivia was walking through the city when a young woman stopped her. She was nervous, hesitant, but her eyes shone with admiration. "I saw what you did in that store," she said softly. "It gave me the courage to stand up to someone in my life too." Olivia smiled, placing a gentle but firm hand on the young woman's shoulder. "Good," she said. "Never let fear silence you." Because that was the lesson. That was the real victory. One corrupt officer had been removed from power, but the bigger change had already begun. and Olivia Carter would always be ready to fight for it. If you ever witness injustice, don't stay silent. Record, report, and stand up for what's right. Share this story to remind people that power must be held accountable. Comment below. Have you ever faced a situation like this? How did you handle it? Let's talk about it. Justice starts with awareness. Awareness starts with you. Stand up, speak out, make a difference. Subscribe for more powerful stories that expose the truth and fight for justice.